Hey everyone, you're watching We Had That, and today I'm going to talk about the 1982 Wave 1 Masters of the Universe Zodac action figure from Mattel, and I'm going to try to clarify some of the misconceptions about this character. Right from the beginning, Zodac was a strange and mysterious figure. Unlike the other characters released in the first wave, who were each based on a relatively simple premise, the idea behind Zodac was much more complicated and difficult to understand. He-Man was the strong hero, Man-at-Arms was the wise older warrior and weapons guy, Skeletor was the leader of the villains, Merman was the water guy. Those made sense to me as a kid. But Zodac was the cosmic enforcer. What does that mean? And it wasn't even clear if he was a good guy or a bad guy. I've heard people talk about Zodak's history, and I've read in several places that Mattel originally made Zodac evil to even out the good guys and the bad guys, 4 of each. But this doesn't match up with what I've seen. The original 1982 Zodac packages, which showed 8 characters on the back, listed him as simply Zodac, Cosmic Enforcer. The card pictured here is my Tila card, but the artwork on the back of each card was the same for all 8 figures. His later package, that came out with the second wave in 1983, has artwork showing Zodac shooting at He-Man and Man-at-Arms with the text, "Zodac attacks the heroic warriors using all the evil power at his command." This suggests that Zodac wasn't made one of the bad guys until the second wave, when there were actually more bad guys than heroes. So the idea that Mattel was trying to even out the teams just doesn't make any sense to me. As a kid, I had 4 of the first 8 figures. I'm pretty sure I got He-Man and Skeletor right when they first arrived in stores. Man-at-Arms followed shortly behind, and at some point I ended up with a Stratos figure, but I really don't remember when. I really wanted a Beastman, and I would have liked to have had a Tila as well. At the time, I didn't like Merman at all, though he's one of my favorites now, but Zodac was the one figure that I didn't even think about at the time. That could have been because he wasn't included in any of the first 4 mini-comics. In fact, Zodac wasn't included in any of the mini-comics. But even that fact depends on how you look at it. More on that later. I've seen Zodac packaged on the original 8-back cards with 2 different mini-comics, The Vengeance of Skeletor and King of Castle Grayskull. It's possible that he may have been packaged with any of the first 4 mini-comics, but I'm not sure. On the 1983 packages, I've seen him packaged with the Power of Point Dread mini-comic, which has an ad inside that lists Zodac with the evil warriors and describes him as an evil cosmic enforcer. But the one I see most often packaged with Zodac is Slave City. Although none of the comics feature Zodac, there is an interesting story behind the Slave City mini-comic. First, the copyright date on this mini-comic is 1983, and second, the back cover mentions Fisto, Whiplash, Buzz-Off, Cobra Khan, Webstore, Jitsu, and Clawful, so it's likely that this comic was created as Mattel was working on the 3rd wave of Masters of the Universe toys, which would have been a couple of years after the Zodac figure was released. But even though Zodac would have been an old character at this time, Slave City was supposed to feature him in this story. According to Lee Nordling, the chief editor of this issue, Mattel's art director Ron Cook sent the script for Slave City to the comic book team, and the main antagonist was Zodac, but spelled with a K instead of a C for some reason. The comic guys didn't know that Zodac was already an established character, so when they created his look, it was nothing like the action figure. The completed comic was sent back to Ron Cook, who was surprised to see that Zodac looked completely different from the official character. It would have taken a lot of time and money to redo all those panels with Zodac to look like the Zodac figure, so Lee Nordling said that he came up with the idea of just changing the character's name in the comic by changing the letter Z to an L and K to an R, giving him the new name Lodar instead of Zodac. Once again, kids didn't learn about Zodac from reading this mini-comic. But now you can go back and read Slave City, knowing that at one point, Lodar was officially supposed to be Zodac, so this would have been the only mini-comic to give kids any insight into the character Zodac. Well, kind of. Brazilian kids got their Masters of the Universe figures through the company Estrela. The details are a little bit fuzzy, but apparently Zodac did get a mini-comic from the Brazilian Estrela release that was written in Portuguese. The story title translates to Zodac, Distant Invasion in English. This was considered a lost mini-comic for a long time, but technically there was a Zodac mini-comic. It was only released in Brazil, so that probably didn't help many kids in the United States and Canada learn about this enigmatic character. With kids being unaware that the bad guy in Slave City had his name changed from Zodac to Lodar, and the only true Zodac mini-comic being released exclusively in Brazil, how did kids in the United States and Canada learn about Zodac? Well, Zodac was a character in several of DC's full-size Masters of the Universe comic books. He first appeared in a 14-page story called Fate is the Killer, which was included as a bonus story in several of DC's biggest titles in 1982, including comics like Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, Detective Comics, Action Comics, and a bunch of others. In this story, Zodac is one of the primary characters. He appears for the first time as a neutral cosmic being who rides around the multitude of dimensional planes in a flying space chair for unexplained reasons. His space chair looks a lot like the throne in the Castle Grayskull playset. He shows up on Eternia to save He-Man from being killed. Zodac fights He-Man to keep him from fighting Skeletor because Zodac believes that Skeletor will kill He-Man during their fight. But He-Man fights Skeletor and is briefly killed anyway before being brought pretty much immediately back to life by, energy? Oh, and by the way, Superman is randomly hanging around. The issue ends with Superman saying, "That's all well and good, but will someone please explain what I'm doing here?" No one does. Zodac also appears in a 3-part DC miniseries later in 1982, where he's again supposed to be an impartial third party, but where he once again intervenes anyway. His level of intervention seems to be based entirely on how he feels at any given time, and almost always seems to lean towards helping the good guys. Although over the course of these 3 issues, the percentage of time he spends interfering in the story arc is probably a smaller percentage than in Fate of the Killer. One other time that Zodac almost appeared in a mini-comic was with Point Dread and the Talon Fighter. Some of the Point Dread Talon Fighter playsets came with a book and record which had a brief appearance by Zodac guiding He-Man to Point Dread and the Talon Fighter. Again here, Zodac is a relatively neutral character who maybe leans a little bit towards the good side of things. In addition to the mini-comics that came with the figures and the full-size comics by DC, Masters of the Universe also had a series of storybooks by Golden. Zodac appears in at least one of these books, The Sword of Skeletor. Based on the characters that appeared in this book in the 1983 copyright date, I believe it was one of the earlier books in the series. In it, Zodac is referred to as a wizard who shows up in a burst of magic. Interestingly, even though he's called a wizard, it's one of the few times in any media that he has a laser gun. He is once again talking about Skeletor upsetting the balance of good and evil and presented again as a neutral character. Zodac made 3 appearances in the He-Man and the Masters of the Universe Filmation cartoon, which seemed to follow the character traits set forth by his appearances in the DC comics. In the episode Quest for He-Man, Skeletor erases He-Man's memory and sends him through a portal to a strange alien world, not knowing who he is. When his friends ask the sorceress for help, she summons Zodac, rider of the cosmic spaceways, to tell her where He-Man is. His next appearance is in the episode The Search, in which Zodac visits the sorceress to tell her of a grave danger so enormous that the mind can scarcely conceive of it. Skeletor is drilling down into Eternia to acquire the powerful Star Seed. With it, he will be all-powerful, so He-Man must follow him and stop him. It turns out that Zodac let Skeletor know the location of the Star Seed to test He-Man. Zodac knew that He-Man would stop Skeletor and wanted to make sure that he wouldn't use the Star Seed on Skeletor. He-Man, of course, passes the test. Zodak's last appearance in the original cartoon series was in the episode Golden Discs of Knowledge. In this episode, He-Man is summoned to Castle Grayskull by the sorceress because something strange is going on. He-Man helps her figure out that she's being contacted by someone. It turns out to be Xenthor, the former keeper of the golden discs of knowledge, who was banished to the Phantom Dimension by the Council of the Wise for stealing the discs and giving them to Skeletor. He contacts the sorceress because he wants to redeem himself. Zodac is the last member of the Council of the Wise, so the sorceress summons him to Castle Grayskull to get his opinion on the matter. He-Man commits to helping Xenthor if Zodac will give him a chance. With He-Man's help, Zodac agrees to let Xenthor try to retrieve the discs from Skeletor and releases him as a phantom from the Phantom Dimension. Xenthor and He-Man succeed in recovering the discs, so Zodac, as Cosmic Enforcer and Watcher of the Universe, decides that he needs an assistant and makes Xenthor a Cosmic Enforcer too. This episode probably gave us the most information about Zodac of anything we had a chance of seeing back in the 1980s. But what was the original intention for Zodac? Well, according to what I've read, Tila was originally going to be two characters, Tila and the Goddess. Mattel decided that kids wouldn't want two female characters, so Tila and the Goddess were combined into just the Tila action figure. But Mattel still wanted the first wave to include 8 figures, so they needed to come up with one more character for the first wave. The idea for Masters of the Universe had always been to reuse parts for multiple figures, so when Zodac was created, the arms and legs came from Skeletor and Merman, while the torso came from Stratos and Beastman. His head was the only new piece on the figure itself, and of course, he had unique armor which looked a little bit more space-themed than the other characters. As a side note, his armor appears to have bullets on the side. I'm not sure that that's what they're supposed to be, but that's what they look like to me, which doesn't make sense if he's carrying around a laser blaster. Oh, and he was given a laser blaster, making him the only first-wave figure to come with a gun. While we're on the subject of his armor and his weapon, Mattel released a weapons pack that included armor and weapons that had already been released, but this time in new colors. A black version of Zodak's armor and a black version of his gun were included in the weapons pack. Over the years, the black version of his armor has come to be associated with another mysterious character, affectionately known by fans as Wonder Bread He-Man. There's an image dated 1981 by Masters of the Universe creator Mark Taylor, where the original Zodac character, who was called Xenthor at the time, can be seen looking extremely close to the final figure, right down to the monster feet. His helmet was a little bit different, but aside from that, it looked just like Zodac. He even had his laser blaster. Mark's original description for Xenthor, before he was even called Zodac, was Xenthor, man of the future, scientifically heightened senses, knowledge, and weapons, acts in support role to He-Man, and as a foil to Tila's mystic nature. The concept was for a spaceman with a helmet that gave him heightened sensory perception. Right from the 1981 Mattel licensing package, which was probably some of the earliest mass-produced information about Masters of the Universe ever, Zodak's description was changed to the Cosmic Enforcer, the bounty hunter of our exciting universe. If you're old enough to remember 1981, The Empire Strikes Back had just come out the year before, and Boba Fett, the bounty hunter, was hugely popular. So it makes sense that this new toy line mixing fantasy and science fiction might want to throw a bounty hunter into the mix. However, I don't know of any other mention of Zodac being a bounty hunter anywhere in the Masters of the Universe canon. It seems like there were different ideas about what Zodac should be until the neutral Watcher of the Universe characterization seemed to stick. Interestingly, this was very similar to a DC character called Metron, created by Jack Kirby in 1971 as part of the New Gods series. Metron also traveled around the universe in a flying space chair and didn't take sides. When I think back about Zodac, I never really had much of an opinion of him when I was young. I think he's a pretty cool figure now, but the objective observer role that he played in the comics and the cartoon would not have made me want him more as a kid. If I had read more exciting adventures with Zodac in the mini-comics, that probably would have been the best way to make me want him back in the 80s. But now, I like the figure simply for the way he looks. What do you think of Zodac? Did you have him as a kid? If so, what role did he play in your adventures? Was he a hero or a villain? Or an objective observer? or a bounty hunter? Tell me in the comments below. Also, please give this video a like, share it on social media. If you enjoy my content, please subscribe to my channel and hit that notifications bell. And one last thing, if you collect toys, you should know about Toylanta, one of the biggest toy shows in the southeastern United States, held annually just north of Atlanta, Georgia. Visit Toylanta.com for more information. As always, thanks for watching.